Hi, my name is Joel Blumberg. I host a radio program called Silver Screen Audio, www.silverscreenaudio.com. I'm here to talk to you about a film called Scotland Yard Inspector. Now, when you hear this title, you would expect an opening sequence with some official music, like the march from Louis de Rochemont's 20th Century Fox semi-documentaries, like The House on 92nd Street, or The Street with No Name, or perhaps a Royal Philharmonic version of London Bridges Falling Down, such as the one that John Ford used in his Gideon's Day, made 5 years after this film was made. But after the opening sequence, in which the only credit reveals the name Robert Lippert Presents, you see a man and a woman in a car, with the woman running down the man in the fog of London before the rest of the credits are shown over some nondescript music, conducted by Muir Matheson of Royal Philharmonic fame. But let's face it, this film has as much to do with the Scotland Yard Inspector as the North Pole has to do with the game of golf. The hero of this film is not a Scotland Yard Inspector. He's not a member of the Metropolitan Police Force, the constabulary presence in Greater London, not to include the City of London, which is patrolled by the City of London Police, a.k.a. the Bobbies. The hero is not any sort of law officer. In fact, he's not even English. In reality, he's an American magazine writer trying to get out of London, but that convenient fog that was an ally to the first murder in the film has grounded him as well. The film's context would have been much more accurate had it used its original title, Lady in the Fog. Not that this is the only incongruity in the film. In fact, there are more holes in this script than a pound of Swiss cheese. Lois Maxwell is billed as the female star, but Bernadette O'Farrell has much more screen time than Miss Maxwell has. In fact, it's about 20 minutes into the film before the future Miss Moneypenny appears. But Lois was a bigger star at the time, and Miss O'Farrell, though having a bigger role, did not have the star power that Miss Maxwell had. We'll have more on Lois Maxwell later. More holes in the script. There's a scene in which Cesar Romero's character and Bernadette O'Farrell's character are dining in an empty nightclub. The reason it's empty is because it's a members-only club. Well, if that's true, how did these two even get into the joint? There was never any mention of either one being a member. Oh, well. And how about this one? Romero and O'Farrell finally get to Scotland Yard. Romero, whose Americanism is explained early in the film by having him come to the UK as a reporter during the war and enlisting in the RAF, shades of his real-life buddy Tyrone Powell, who starred in the title role of a Yank in the RAF 11 years earlier. Romero sees a buddy of his, Detective Sergeant Riley, played by Alastair Hunter, with whom we assume he served in the war. Well, he wants to see, ta-da, the Scotland Yard Inspector. He barges into the inspector's office, thinking it's another buddy. Well, it's not. As he finds out in a scene more suited to an Abbott and Costello meet the Keystone Cops movie, he learns that his buddy retired several years ago. Duh. You would think that if he was that good a friend of Romero, Romero would have known about the retirement. But we finally get a chance to meet the, ta-da, Scotland Yard Inspector, played quite well by Campbell Singer. Want more? There's a scene in a sanatorium where one of the suspects is being held. Well, let's go back a step. Romero finds out from a movie director, played by the always smooth Jeffrey Keane, that a suspect was in this sanatorium but had died 2 years prior. Nevertheless, Romero wants to go to the sanatorium. He doesn't believe the guy's dead, so he goes out there. Meanwhile, Keane senses that Romero is headed in that direction, telephones the head nurse out there. Now, unless Romero uses a Star Trek transporter, it takes him some time to get to this place. Yet when he arrives, none of the personnel know that they are not supposed to tell Romero that the man is still alive. Duh! You would think that the head nurse, knowing the importance of keeping Romero away from this man, would have alerted the other people. And on the subject of the sanatorium, when Romero, after gathering that the man is not really dead, sneaks back into the building through an open window. Duh! There are no bars in the window. Romero can walk in and out as he pleases. I guess this is an honor sanatorium, where the patients can come and go as they please. Hey, maybe the animals are running the asylum. There are more. But when you're grinding out 10 to 14-day shoots, who has the time to worry about little things like a logical script? As in many of these quickies, there is some comedy relief. To tell you the truth, the comedy is the best part of this film. There were some genuinely funny bits, mostly with an airline reservation agent named Boswell, perfectly portrayed by Frank Birch. The funniest is when he devises an alternative transportation for Romero out of England. There's also a humorous segment where Romero is in a bar concocting a libation that looks more like a chemical formula for nitroglycerin. The scene was better suited for Colin Clive. All that was missing from this dialogue was, "It's alive! It's alive!" Quite frankly, after sampling this brew, all the character should have said is, "We're dead! We're dead!" But then there would be no movie. And that might have been a bad thing, and maybe not. This movie is considered film noir. That's because they have a hero in a trench coat in foggy London, a damsel in distress, a smooth villain, and a femme fatale. But this is as much film noir as 42nd Street. In fact, the Busby Berkeley film is darker than this one. Scotland Yard Inspector stars Cesar Romero. Romero was an interesting Hollywood story whose career spanned 60 years. He was born in New York City in the 20th century's first decade to a wealthy Cuban family. As the family's fortunes went south thanks to the stock market crash, Romero was already working on Broadway, and his handsomeness put him in top demand as a romantic Latin lover type. He moved west, taking his entire family with him in the early 30s, where he made his film debut in Hollywood in something called The Shadow Laughs. To say it was bad is being kind. There was no shadow, no laughs, and subsequently, the movie has faded into oblivion. Romero was billed near the bottom of the credits. Once again, his Latin look served him well. He got himself a small role in the original The Thin Man, which starred William Powell and Myrna Loy as Nick and Nora Charles. Romero played a gigolo. He was getting noticed. Not under contract to a studio proved fruitful for Romero in his first years in Tinseltown. He worked high-end supporting roles for almost every major motion picture corporation. At Warner Brothers, he was in support of Leslie Howard and Kay Francis in British Agent. At Darryl Zanuck's fledgling 20th Century Pictures, Cesar supported Ronald Colman and Loretta Young in the biographical Clive of India, and that was followed by another biography, Cardinal Richelieu, which starred George Arliss. He jumped back and forth between leads in B films and secondary roles in A productions. He would more often than not be cast as a smooth villain. All that would change in the late 30s. John Ford cast him in perhaps the best ever Shirley Temple vehicle, Wee Willie Winkie, based on the Rudyard Kipling classic story. By the way, Winkie was originally perceived as a boy, Percival Williams, but Fox changed it to a girl, Priscilla Williams, to capitalize on Temple's popularity. Cesar was impressive as a roguish bandit. He would work exclusively for the now called 20th Century Fox, and his screen image would shortly change from bad guy to second banana thanks to a Norwegian ice skater named Sonja Henie. In his best Ralph Bellamy tradition, Romero lost Henie to Don Amici in Happy Landing and Richard Green in My Lucky Star. He also lost Loretta Young to Warner Baxter in 1939's Wife, Husband, and Friend. Now, Baxter's previous work would have a major impact on Romero's next career move. In 1928, Baxter had portrayed O. Henry's hero, the Cisco Kid, in a film called In Old Arizona. It won Baxter an Oscar for Best Actor. 3 years later, he made a film called The Cisco Kid, and then let the character go. By the end of the 30s, Fox had established a solid B unit headed by Sol M. Wurtzel. One of the staples of the unit were series films. Charlie Chan was the most popular. In fact, Romero would appear in one of them. Then there was Mr. Moto with Peter Lorre, The Jones Family with Jed Prouty and Spring Byington, and others. Wurtzel had the idea of bringing back Cisco as a series, with Baxter back in the saddle and Romero in support. It was well received, but Baxter then left Fox, and Wurtzel offered the role of Cisco to Romero. He was a natural. While Baxter was an American playing a Hispanic part, Romero by heritage was the real McCoy. In the next year and a half, Romero made 5 Cisco Kid features. He also, during that time, played Doc Holliday in a Randolph Scott Western called Frontier Marshal. Scott played Wyatt Earp. While it's never mentioned in the OK Corral movie history, this film holds its own with any of them, with the exception of the John Ford masterpiece, My Darling Clementine. And Romero's interpretation was the reason why. Cisco ended in 1940. Romero's career at Fox took off. It was back to second leads, though, in those Technicolor musicals that starred the likes of Betty Grable, Alice Faye, and Carmen Miranda. Romero lost the girl to the likes of Dick Haymes, George Montgomery, and John Payne. Like many other Hollywoodites, Romero served in the Coast Guard during World War II. When he returned from service after doing another musical, Fox offered Cesar the role of his career opposite his best friend Tyrone Power in Captain from Castile. Cesar stole the film, but nobody at Fox seemed to notice. It was back to those musicals which were beginning to run out of steam, and as they did, Fox was beginning to cut loose their contract players, and Romero was one of those who was not renewed. Enter Robert Lippert, a former movie theater owner from Northern California. Lippert had made some money making 5 to 10-day quickies. He would hire young talent on the way up or older talent on the way down. Cesar was in the latter group, but it was a payday. Romero, now silver-haired, but still with that trademark mustache and those handsome Latin lover looks, would make 5 films for Lippert. In fact, some of Lippert's best work starred Cesar Romero. Romero stayed active. He did television, including a series in the 50s called Passport to Danger. He guested on almost every television series of the era. He was still in demand as a supporting actor, making films like Vera Cruz, once again stealing the film from the likes of Gary Cooper and Burt Lancaster. The All-Star Around the World in 80 Days, and then Ocean's 11. And again, he stole the film from Frank Sinatra and his Rat Pack. And finally, Donovan's Reef with John Wayne. Just when it seemed that Cesar would be thrust into fading star oblivion, William Dozier offered him the role of the Joker in his 1960s Batman TV show. Like 2 predecessors who had played guest villains, Frank Gorshin and Burgess Meredith, Romero was allowed to chew up the scenery, and it produced great results. It's fair to say that Cesar Romero never stopped acting. At age 81, he played opposite another octogenarian, Jane Wyman, in Falcon Crest. As always, he was the true professional. The female lead in this film is played by Lois Maxwell, far removed in both age and in characterization from her signature career role as Miss Moneypenny of the James Bond films. In this one, she plays the femme fatale who gets her just desserts. Although known for her work in the UK, Ms. Maxwell was born in Canada. She made some Hollywood films in the 40s, won the most promising newcomer Golden Globe Award in 1947. Her best role was the wife of Lee J. Cobb in the noir classic The Dark Past, which starred William Holden. She also played opposite Ronald Reagan and Shirley Temple in one of the worst pictures in each career, That Hagen Girl. Moving to the UK, she scored a part in a film called Corridor of Mirrors, which starred Eric Portman, but today is known for the feature debut of Christopher Lee. Her career going nowhere, she went to Italy for a few films before coming back to the UK for Scotland Yard Inspector. Lois would go on to a prolific career in England during the 50s, but with her marriage decided to cut down on the work. When Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman decided to film the James Bond story Dr. No, Ms. Maxwell lobbied for a role in the film as her husband had had a heart attack and they needed the money. Director Terrence Young offered her either Moneypenny or the recurring role of Bond's girlfriend, Sylvia Trench. Lois was uncomfortable with the revealing scene the latter had in the screenplay. The role as M's secretary guaranteed just 2 days' work at £100 per day. Maxwell had to supply her own clothes. It turned out that Maxwell's decision was right on. The Trench character was eliminated after From Russia with Love. In 1971, Maxwell was nearly replaced for Diamonds Are Forever after demanding a pay raise. The policewoman's cap that she wears in the film disguises hair she had already dyed for another role. For the filming of A View to a Kill, which would be her final appearance, Bond producer Cubby Broccoli told her that the two of them were the only two ones from Dr. No still working on the series. Maxwell asked that her character be killed off, but Broccoli recast the role instead afterwards. Her total screen time as Moneypenny in 14 films was less than 2 hours, and she spoke fewer than 200 total words. Only Desmond Llewellyn made more Bond films, 18. Lois Maxwell would move back to Canada and would write a column for the Toronto Star. To those who don't even remember her successor's name, Lois Maxwell will always be Miss Moneypenny, never destined to have a dinner with her James Bond. I've made a lot of fun of this film. It was made when you could make money with 10-day quickies. There are no special effects or other gimmicks in this movie, but it served a purpose. So overlook the obvious flaws and accept this film for what it is: entertainment.